So I want to introduce you to our speaker today, who spent 11 or 12 years in Cairo and in Jerusalem, and particularly a long stretch in Jerusalem, where I first met her. She has developed as a journalist an international reputation, but certainly her book on Gaza was very well received. On Hamas and Gaza was very well received. And now she has a new book and has been on a lecture tour that includes some of the top universities that we have. She's come from Harvard. You're going to Columbia, or you've been to Columbia? You're going to go to Columbia?
No, I went to Columbia 3 days ago.
Oh, 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Good. It'll all be a fog after a while. Yeah.
Center for Palestine Studies. They have now a Jerusalem project.
No kidding.
Yes, I knew 3 days ago.
So welcome to Georgetown, and
Thank you.
we'll have a presentation, and then we'll have good Q&A. We'll just put this like this. That's okay. This will pick up, right?
Right?
We don't have to
There?
worry about it.
Okay. So first of all, let me thank John, because we met the first time actually in the American colony in Jerusalem.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was
And
there.
2 days later, I became violently ill. That's why I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I swore I'd never travel again. I was so ill. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Actually, it was a good dinner, but anyway.
A Georgetown graduate. He was one of the first people to get a degree at CCAS. I didn't know him, but I got in touch, and he said, "Come, and I'll give you a tour." And then we went to a place, and he said, "Well, you can drink the juices here." I said, "Are you sure?" Because, it was
Yeah,
just it was clear
depends.
that there would be an issue. He said, "No, I drink it here all the time." We had to cancel our flights back. I mean, it was that bad. But anyway.
Yes, Jerusalem is a strange city.
But we met great people. But go ahead.
So when I met John, I was living in Jerusalem and working in Jerusalem, and I was there for 10 years, from 2003 till 2012.
Oh, the mic's
Yes. No, the mic is doesn't work. So I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. So I remained in Jerusalem. I was in Cairo for 3 years, and I remained in Jerusalem for 10 years, from 2003 till 2012. And I think it's not a detail, because I underline in this way the very special period I was there. I mean, in Jerusalem there are always special periods of time, but it was a very, I have to say, a very lucky one also for the Hamas book, Hamas from Resistance to Government, because there was this very particular window of opportunity in watching the Palestinian politics and the transition from Arafat to the post-Arafat period. And I was talking before with Larian, and yes, activists and leaders from Hamas, they wanted to talk, and they wanted to share their story. And after 2012, it was not possible anymore in the way it was possible in Gaza and in the West Bank in that period. Nevertheless, I put Hamas aside, and after 10 years in Jerusalem, I decided that it was time to write on Jerusalem. And for me, it was very difficult because, of course, we have a lot of books on the issue, a lot of books on Jerusalem, on Israeli politics, on Palestinian politics. And so I wanted to share my Jerusalem in the sense that it's not a personal book, but it's a personal view on the state of art and on the reality of the city. And I wish to start with a provocation. That is that Jerusalem has more geography than history. And Jerusalem, if somebody of you know Jerusalem, is very small. It's a very small city. It used to be the old city, what we now consider the old city, and the new city is now 900,000 inhabitants. It depends on the statistics, of course. The Israeli statistics speak about 700,000 Israelis and 200,000 Palestinians. Is the most populous city in Israel, and but it's not a big city in European terms, also in American terms, not in the Middle Eastern terms. But I think that nowadays Jerusalem has more geography than history. And I inverting what Avishai Margalite wrote in 1991, so the time of the Madrid conference, when he wrote that Jerusalem has always had more history than geography. He was right, of course, as Jerusalem represents for all of us the archetype of urban and social space, of the holy city on earth, and the archetype of the faiths, and the archetype also of the historical complexity in the Mediterranean, so far over the Middle East. I wish to be provocative as much as I can in order to destructure what we generally think about Jerusalem, using the lesson Roland Barthes taught us. It is the city is a discourse. Therefore, I add, we have to learn the vocabulary and the syntax of Jerusalem's language, and geography is a fundamental part of the actual semantic texture of the city. So Jerusalem has more geography than history on different levels. First of all, in terms of space. The space occupied, as I told you before, by the city is gradually and constantly growing since 1967. It means since the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem and the city's unification under the Israeli rule. Jerusalem has never stopped growing because the city's entire political destiny is caught up in its expansion. The borders, already modified and expanded immediately after 1967, have been gradually stretched like elastic. They now include areas to the east and south that are part of the occupied city, where the most important mayor after 1967, Israeli Mayor Teddy Kollek, focused his so-called finger strategy. So finger strategy means Israeli settlements wedged between one Palestinian neighborhood and another one within occupied East Jerusalem. So Teddy Kollek's and Israeli national objectives were above all two: to attract the Israeli population to Jerusalem with an active and constant housing policy, and to make another division of the city impossible through the presence of the Israeli settlements to the east of the Green Line, as you saw. Symmetrically, the Israeli authorities and planners are carving the zones where the Palestinian demographic increase are concentrated. The new Greater Jerusalem Bill, I'm sure you heard about it, whose discussion in the Knesset committees has been delayed by the Netanyahu government under the request of the US government, has been a topic in the breaking news in the recent days and weeks. It leads to a further expansion in terms of space and in terms of population in order to support the increase of the Israeli population and therefore to strengthen the ratio of the Israeli population inside the municipal borders of Jerusalem. In the new bill, extremely populous settlements like Ma'ale Adumim for the Israeli authorities, its municipality, will become part of the Greater Jerusalem. And on the contrary, there are legislation moves, paradoxically, in the making to exclude some extremely populous Palestinian suburbs like Shuafat. Actually, Shuafat is the only Palestinian refugee camp in Jerusalem, and one of the villages comprised in 1947 corpus separatum, so in the partition, and confined them on the other side of the borders, so on the other side of municipal borders. So this is the reason Jerusalem has more geography than history in terms of space, but secondly also in terms of cardinal points. In order to understand Jerusalem, we have definitely to use maps, lines, borders, cardinal points, streets, squares, street signs are the specific Jerusalem vocabulary, and they tell us what Jerusalem became nowadays. The Green Line changed Jerusalem's history, and we know it, from 1948 on. And from 1948 on, there is a west and there is an east. And we defined through west and through east the international and internal structure of the city. And from 1948 on, cardinal points became an unavoidable part of each inhabitant's life. Everyone in Jerusalem has his or her compass. Everyone knows how to calculate the exact moment in which or he or she is. There are really few other places in the world where the cardinal points are so important, I would say decisive in more than one sense. The cardinal points in Jerusalem, unique in their category, follow the broken lines of history. And also, I have to say, the prevarications of international political actors seated around elegant tables. The Jerusalemite cardinal points follow, above all, the thick lines of the pencils used from time to time by diplomats, the military, politicians, leaders, and they are like knives in the flesh. This is a picture of the Musrara neighborhood. Is between the Damascus Gate and the New Gate at the back of the Notre Dame Hospice. But I wanted to let you see the thick lines. Then we will come back to the let me see if I find, okay. So this is the Armistice Line. So the famous Green Line and the Seam Line. So the Jordanian and the Israeli line, and in the middle the Seam Line. Seam Line, they are not centimeters, they are centimeters on the map, but they are meters and dozens of meters, as we know in front of the American colony. There is a very wide Seam Line where the Israeli businessmen built a lot of hotels, for example, in front of Sheikh Jarrah. So, nevertheless, what contemporary history means in Jerusalem, that means east and west, and means also for the people of Jerusalem, cannot erase the whole history of the city, as history has a long durée and its own long path. It means that for the inhabitants, Jerusalem is one. The city is not a part of the city. The city is not the eastern part of the city or the western part of the city. Not only for Israelis, but also for Palestinians, Jerusalem is one and just one. There is a not a Palestinian east and an Israeli west, as if in the history of the city the community's sense of belonging could have been defined by the connection to a specific cardinal point. I wish to be clear. As a journalist and also as a historian, my description of Jerusalem as one city is the real city I lived, I witnessed, and I studied. It is not at all similar to what the Israeli governments think about Jerusalem since 1967 as a unified city under the Israeli rule and the eternal capital of the State of Israel, unrecognized capital under the international law. What I try to depict is a real city where the inhabitants nevertheless share a common space in a very asymmetrical way as rulers, the Israelis, and occupied the Palestinians. What I personally hope as a just and lasting peace is the idea of a one and shared Jerusalem, for example, as envisioned by the Israelis and Palestinians on the ground. It means in Israel-Palestine, who since 2012 are working on the vision of one homeland, two states. So one and shared Jerusalem under the administration of the two communities. It seems a very idealistic idea. I have to say that this vision is not new. It is part of a very long lasting debate that involves not only the idea of a one-state solution, but also the discussion of a binational state. I quote only two high-profiled among the intellectuals who tried to envision alternative ideas, both before the birth of the state of Israel and later. So the first one is Martin Buber, the binationalist Martin Buber, who was against the idea of a Jewish state, and later on explained his binationalism together with the head of the Hebrew University, Judah Magnes, in a testimony to the Anglo-American Inquiry Commission 1947. And the other, of course, the other high-profile intellectual is Edward Said, who wrote the famous article on the one-state solution, 1999, for the New York Times Magazine. Incidentally, I will remind Edward Said and Martin Buber later while explaining the cardinal points in Jerusalem. They share the same house, or at least they share the same house in different parts of the history. There is one example that could explain easily the gap between the political maps and the sense of belonging to the city. During the first half of the 20th century, there was not a Palestinian urban development in the East vis-à-vis the expansion of the Jewish presence in the West. On the contrary, both communities developed their own middle-class bourgeois presence in the West because that was the cardinal point. That was the cardinal point of the sea, of the trade. So Jaffa was there, Tel Aviv was there. The real estate properties in West Jerusalem, and I strongly suggest to read Salim Tamari's books. In 1948, the real estate properties in West Jerusalem were 40% Palestinian, 26% Jewish, with the remainder, so almost 35%, belonging to the public or even more often to Palestinian religious institutions like the Awqaf, the Islamic Trust. This is not a detail. It contradicts rather our own Western perception, according to which the Israeli and Palestinian communities in Jerusalem belong, each of them, to a precise quarter of the city's compass. This is not the case. Edward Said, for example, was born on the western side, the actual western side of Jerusalem in Talbieh, a neighborhood that remains strongly in the Jerusalemite memory as the neighborhood built by the Palestinian Christian middle class and upper class. Martin Buber lived in the house of the Salim Said family for a while. And so I share also what Edward Said thought about his story when he wrote well after that so closely intertwined are Israelis and Palestinians that despite their inequality and antipathy, that clean separation simply can't really occur or work. There is also a second example, a painful example in the Palestinian national consciousness and memory. In Jerusalem, people in need of a psychiatric help go west to the mental health center in Kfar Shaul. Before 1948, Deir Yassin was there. And the remnants of the village are still there inside the mental health center, surrounded by a net, enclosed, invisible to the inhabitants of Kfar Shaul. Deir Yassin was one of the villages that, in the western side of the map, ringed Jerusalem, and before 1948 furnished the city with vegetables, milk, olives, manual labor. Furthermore, Deir Yassin, as Shrafat, was one of the villages inside the borders of the Corpus Separatum in 1947. And there is a third example, among many others, that describes the life inside the old city as life in a urban space not crystallized according to cardinal points and extremely defined borders. We have to remember that until the last part of the 19th century, Jerusalem was the old city. So the city was the old city. These pictures are from the Eric Matson archive in the Library of Congress. A huge archive, completely digitalized. So there are thousands and thousands of pictures of the Middle East overlapping the American colony archives. He was one of the photographers. This is the new Jerusalem, and this is the old city. So New Jerusalem is very, very, very big. But this used to be Jerusalem. So Jerusalem encircled and enclosed by the Suleiman the Magnificent's ancient walls. So the city, the old city, what we describe as the old city, was the city. And I wish to show you also how small is the old city now. A tessera in the mosaic of Jerusalem. And this is the idea of Greater Jerusalem. So the red lines, more or less, are the outline of the separation fence or defensive barrier according to Israeli definition, and separation fence according to the Palestinian one. But it's also the idea of the new municipal borders, and there is Ma'ale Adumim, which is one of the biggest settlements around Jerusalem. So the city was the old city, and until the advent of the British Mandate, Jerusalem was far more mixed in confessional terms than we could imagine. The British broke up the subtle and constant osmosis between the communities along invisible borders and seam lines, and subdivided the built-up areas inside the old city into 4 separate quarters. We know them: the Muslim, the Christian, the Armenian, and the Jewish quarters. Again, politics and international intervention modified the urban composition and social life of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem also in this case has more geography than history, space, cardinal points. Thirdly, in terms of spatial redefinition of Jerusalem's community and social life. Jerusalem is the archetype of the city. I think we share this idea. But it's also at risk as a city, because it has not anymore a square. The 4 quarters no longer share any common space, in any common place and space in the old Jerusalem. No streets functions as they used to, as an axis through the old city, and this is the way in the Byzantine times the artist depicted the city. This is the oval is the old city of Jerusalem, and the cardo stretched along the city with a column. This is a column, and this is the reason Bab al-Hamud is called the gate of the column. So there was the column, and this is the Roman idea of Jerusalem, the ancient Romans' idea of Jerusalem. And there was a street as a sort of social space, not only a sort of magnificent street inside the old city. So there is no street functioning as it used to, as an axis through the old city. And also the market inside the Damascus Gate is not the same, not a single shared and public square can be found. And I know that it's provocative and paradoxical, because inside the old city there are two very wide squares. But if the square is the epitome par excellence of a public space shared by all communities, as the lawn here in Georgetown, of intermingling and of free circulation of people and relations, of anonymity inside a public space, then Jerusalem lacks definitely public spaces, not only in the old city, but also in the new city. So for me, Jerusalem is no longer a city. It is a urban body where the ongoing conflict has changed the parameters of coexistence, moving from open and shared social spaces to closed social spaces where access is limited according to ethno-religious affiliation. The limitedness and exclusivity of social spaces are best defined by the two most renowned squares. In fact, the only two large squares in the old city, the Noble Sanctuary, Temple Mount, and just beneath, the plaza that leads to the Western Wall, one beside the other. They are endowed with an absolute religious connotation, or also a deep political religious meaning. Where are this is the Noble Sanctuary, Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount. And beside, there is the Western Wall and the plaza. This is the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, and the plaza that Moshe Safdie built after 1967. So the Noble Sanctuary, Temple Mount, and the Western Wall Plaza are best but not inclusive. They epitomize separation and exclusiveness in Jerusalem as a contested city. For Jews, the Noble Sanctuary is the heart of Judaism and faith. For Muslim Palestinians, the Western Wall is a denied place of faith, the Barak Wall. It represents the erasure of Palestinian Jerusalemite history through the Israeli authorities' destruction of the ancient Mughrabi quarter in July 1967, just after the Six-Day War. I don't quote the Holy Sepulchre Square because it's a very small one, and also because in the texture of the old city, the two squares are the Noble Sanctuary and the Western Wall Plaza. The squares are both exclusive places, almost forbidden to members of the other community. Conflicting realities face one another, much as they did, if you remember, in Berlin before 1989, which was another divided city. The eastern and the western sectors faced each other along the Berlin Wall. They wanted to show to the other part their own perceived superiority through the magnificence of their public buildings, the Staatsbibliothek and the Philharmonie on the western side, and the Alexanderplatz on the eastern side. The squares exist one in front of the other. The confrontation of the two squares at Excludendum is the architectural and spatial expression of their respective communities in an overcrowded urban reality. The old city is predominantly, if you know, narrow. There are a lot of little streets, alleys, houses. It's really crowded. The squares are large and empty spaces, and therefore they are also a clear demonstration of power in architectural terms. Open spaces that can contain the extensive and populous community of the faithful, in addition to the symbols of the faith itself. The squares of exclusiveness in Jerusalem epitomize what the reality is telling us. The contemporary history of the city has been reproduced based on the narrative of each of the single parties. There is no common story. If anything, there are parallel stories that, however, I think political and diplomatic players don't listen to in order to apply possible solutions. For example, what we witnessed recently on and around the Haram al-Sharif, the Noble Sanctuary, tell us a lot about the urban significance of the square. That is also a political significance. Among all very conflicting issues, political and diplomatic issues, the holy places inside the old city are at least the most evident one. The harsh controversy on October 27th UNESCO document, for example, and what we saw last July with first the armed assault by 3 Palestinian citizens of Israel and the killing of 2 Israeli border police, and Israel that decided to install CCTV cameras and turnstiles and metal detectors. So as a reaction, last July, the Islamic Trust called for the boycott of the third holiest site by the faithful to oppose Israel's changes to the delicate status quo. It was only after Israel had removed all the new equipment installed at the site that the Waqf had called for people to return to Al-Aqsa. Palestinians considered the protest as a victory, and objectively we can say as journalists and analysts that it was a successful protest. Furthermore, I think it is even more important to consider the deep meaning of the 2017 Al-Aqsa Protest, as it was more a civil than a religious one. Al-Aqsa, as it is in the Jerusalemite perception, is far more a national, civil, popular identity symbol than a symbol linked only to a specific faith. It is the core, it is the heart of the city. And videos and testimonies, for example, told us that Palestinian Christians were among the protesters. I think it is even more important to underline that the secular Palestinian sector participated at the protest en masse, especially on Salaheddin Street. And among us, the people who know Jerusalem know that Salaheddin is the heart of the commerce in East Jerusalem. So Jerusalem has more geography than history, space, cardinal points, spatial redefinition of social life, and finally, in terms of spatial redefinition of the city per se. Once Jerusalem and the old city were the same overlapping urban space, the first thing that travelers, pilgrims saw during the pilgrimage was the old city of Jerusalem and the ancient walls, enormous, magnificent. They saw the towers, they saw the domes. That is no longer the case. Jerusalem is no longer a small provincial city surrounded by a wall, as it was during the Ottoman also until the Ottoman period. It has become a densely populated and extensive city. It is the biggest city in Israel. This kind of transformation from a totally provincial urban center into the internationally unrecognized capital of Israel originated with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, without the necessity of controlling the city, its borders, and its demographics. There probably would not have been such a rapid expansion. To put this in context, Jerusalem's population at the end of 2014, as I told you, consisted of nearly 900,000 Israelis and Palestinians, and nearly double the population of 1983. In Jerusalem's new configuration, thus, the old city is no longer the city in its entirety. It's now the heart, it's now a tessera, but it's not the city. The old historical center is compressed by the overwhelming peripheries, and it is very normal in other cities, in Rome, in everywhere, in Milan, in Torino, in the European cities, in Paris, in London. The paradox of history, however, requires that even today, almost a century and a half after European pilgrims' grand tour, Jerusalem appears to travelers to be a fortified city. Jerusalem nowadays is still a city within walls. That is the archetype of an anti-modern city. The ancient walls of Suleiman the Magnificent contain only the religious and tourist dimension of one of the most contested places in the world. Instead, third millennium Jerusalem is enclosed by the wall of a defensive barrier that is a concrete wall of separation, and it's a newly equipped fortress. So now Jerusalem is caged as it used to be until the end of the 19th century, inside that security system that nowadays is composed of wall, checkpoints, guarded entrances, terminals, what I call postmodern drawbridges. After a period of openness to modernity between the end of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of the British Mandate, during which construction began outside the walls and gates in the new middle-class suburbs like Talbieh, but also like Musrara, Katamon, the Montefiore part, Jerusalem has returned to its pre-modern state. So today, it used to be in its history, Jerusalem is a city surrounded by walls. Jerusalem is a very complex issue for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. This is the reason why it has been put inside the diplomatic drawer as dust under the carpet. It did not solve the issue, nor simplified the path to a possible solution. On the contrary, continued delay eroded any possibility to reach a compromise. So the extraordinary and unique history of Jerusalem per se demystifies the cliché of East-West identity, not only in Jerusalem, but also what we consider our East-West divide. Both the communities feel their Jerusalemite identity as one. They belong to one city that has neither East nor West, except for the embroilments of a very recent period in contemporary history. That means 70 years. For thousands of years, belonging to Jerusalem meant to be part of a city and not of a small part of it. In its uniqueness, Jerusalem is still today a body, a corpus, and it is completely separated, separatum, from all the rest. Essentially, Jerusalem embodies its distinctiveness. And probably, in order to find a solution, we need to come back once again to what Avishai Margalite wrote in 1991, and to what we know since the beginning. Nevertheless, Jerusalem has more history than geography, or better said, that I will quote Edward Said in an interview to Cindy Katz in 2000, geography is the expression of history rather than of something else. And I thank you very much.